The emergency alert blared through the intake commons without any warning. No declaration had preceded the siren, and no defensive armor shielded the crowded platform from the sudden shift in atmospheric density. A sharp, rhythmic screech whistled from the ceiling terminals, indicating a localized chemical anomaly near the western wall. In an instant, the high-density gathering of military recruits fractured. Exactly 412 elite cadets scrambled backward, pushing away from the perimeter in a sudden rush of heavy boots and clicking armor plates. They left a massive, hollow space at the far end of the room, clearing a wide radius of empty tables, as if a gravity weapon had swept the deck clean. At the exact center of this empty zone sat Cadet Chloe, entirely alone. She did not join the evacuation. She did not reach for a protective mask. The young human remained flatly seated, her oversized uniform sleeves rolled up to her elbows as she huddled over her tray. On the metal surface sat a small, dented cylinder of primitive steel, covered in peeling vinyl stickers of a round, docile terrestrial rodent. A visible, shimmering plume of rust-colored heat rose from the open lip of the container, warping the sterile light of the facility and turning the immediate air heavy with an invasive, burning scent. I had trained for 12 orbital cycles to manage Starfleet logistics, but nothing in the curriculum explained why the unarmored primate was smiling at her own destruction. Stay close. The physical avoidance displayed by the cohort was absolute. I marched straight into the newly formed isolation zone, forcing my feet toward Table 7 while my internal moisture scrubbers worked at maximum capacity against the drifting vapor. My translucent silicate skin plates began to turn opaque from the chemical tension, calcifying rapidly along my arms as I stopped 3 paces from the human. I adjusted my tactical visor to log the disturbance, my joints snapping with a sharp, metallic ring that gave away the rising panic in my central nervous system. I needed to clear this hazard before the automated defense systems locked the entire sector down. "Cadet Chloe," I commanded, projecting my voice through the heavy air with strict regulatory force. "Your personal container is releasing an uncontained volatile compound that has already disabled the sensory clusters of multiple adjacent species. Seal the canister immediately." The human stopped her hand. She turned her wide, unblinking eyes toward my position, her face entirely clear of the terror that had gripped the rest of the room. In her right hand, she balanced a cheap plastic scoop filled with a thick, dark red paste that clumped together with terrifying weight. She did not offer a military salute, nor did she show any awareness of the red warning lights now beginning to spin against the polished white walls. "Oh, hey, Vryn," she said, her voice dropping into a flat, casual drawl that lacked any standard academic respect. "It is just chilly. My mother sent the spice paste from New Mexico because the food here is flat. Do you want some? It felt chilly in this room today, so I wanted to warm up my system." Before I could answer her flat explanation, the automated terminal above her table shrieked into a continuous warning tone. The primary overhead indicators flipped from a calm blue to a pulsing, angry amber as the sensors processed the vapor. My wrist display began to scroll with urgent red text, listing the airborne material as an invasive, volatile capsaicin compound. The chemical density in the air had already crossed the safe baseline for 90% of the life forms in our coalition, throwing the room's thermal acidity index completely off the known scale. The defense system did not tolerate compliance delays. The primary ceiling vents instantly reversed their flow, switching from standard air distribution to a high-velocity vacuum intake that roared like an orbital storm. The mechanical gale tore through the mess hall, trying to draw the rust-colored cloud into the secondary scrubbers before it could breach the main corridors. Heavy loose trays rattled across the floor, and the surrounding cadets pressed themselves harder against the exit gates. Chloe did not flinch against the wind. She merely watched the spinning intake fans with mild curiosity, using her thumb to steady her metal flask as the gale pulled at her hair. Then, with an easy, rhythmic swing of her arm, she brought the plastic scoop straight to her mouth. "Cadet, step away from the source," I yelled, reaching down for the chemical suppression canister at my belt as my chest plates cracked audibly under the strain. She ignored my shout and took the bite. The immediate physical result would have signaled a fatal nervous system failure in any recognized military species. Her skin turned a bright, burning pink. Tiny drops of transparent moisture broke out across her forehead. Her eyes immediately filled with liquid, sending thick streaks of fluid down her cheeks while her breathing turned ragged and heavy. "She is burning from inside," a cadet from the eastern wing screamed, his lipid-based body beginning to lose its shape as the drifting scent hit his secondary intake. "Get the medical team to this sector," I shouted into my communicator, my jaws locking in absolute terror as I prepared to deploy the neutralizing spray. "Cadet, spit it out. The material is dissolving your internal lining." Chloe chewed anyway. The sound was terribly steady in the roaring room, a quiet, wet rhythm that went on for 3 full seconds before her throat clicked. She swallowed the entire scoop without a single muscle contraction of protest. "Wow," she whispered, wiping her wet eyes with the edge of her oversized sleeve. She looked down at the red sludge with a small, contented nod, completely indifferent to the sirens that were now vibrating through the floor plates. "That hits the back of the throat perfectly. It has a real kick." My skin plates fractured further down my spine as she dug her plastic utensil back into the steel cylinder for another portion. The station intelligence reached its ultimate limit a moment later, registering the rising acidity in the central ventilation line as an active weaponized breach. The primary filters had completely disintegrated under the chemical weight of her lunch. The main computer spoke with a cold, digital rumble that overrode the sirens. "Level 9, bioweapon hazard confirmed. Initiating total perimeter isolation." 3-ton armored blast doors dropped from the ceiling with a massive impact, slamming into the deck and cutting Mess Hall 4 off from the rest of the command spire. The sudden change in air pressure popped my ears. Before the dust could settle, the automated countermeasure turrets descended from the high corners, their red targeting lasers painting a tight cluster of grid lines directly onto the capybara sticker on Chloe's flask. "Deploying polymeric neutralizing foam," the computer announced. A high-pressure blast of thick gray sludge erupted from the turrets, flooding the table within seconds. The heavy polymer compound was formulated to choke out biological fire and absorb weaponized toxins on impact. It buried the tray, the bench, and the entire human recruit under 40 centimeters of wet, sulfur-tinged mud, pinning everything to the deck. The entire room fell into an absolute, terrified silence. The 400 cadets huddled against the locked doors held their breath, their eyes fixed on the massive mound of gray paste. My chest resin was smoking from my own internal heat, my mind already calculating the immense bureaucratic disaster of a cadet casualty during midday intake. The gray mound suddenly rippled. A small, unarmored hand punched out through the thick layer of sludge, rising toward the ceiling with its fingers locked securely around the handle of the steel flask. The primitive metal container was completely undamaged, its vinyl rodent sticker shining beneath the gray slime. A moment later, Chloe's head broke through the surface of the foam, gasping once before her flat expression returned. A heavy glob of the gray polymer sat directly on top of her brown hair like a ridiculous hat, dripping down her nose as she blinked through the mess. She looked at the dropped blast doors, turned her head toward the lowered laser turrets, and finally looked down at her ruined tray with her first sign of genuine irritation. "Are you guys seriously doing a drill right now?" she asked, her voice echoing clearly across the weapon-locked room. I was only half done with my meal, and now there is literal industrial foam in my crackers. The recovery operation took 3 full hours as the specialist biohazard teams washed down the deck plates and escorted the trembling recruits out of the sealed sector. I spent the afternoon in the medical wing, sitting stiffly while the automated units applied layers of cooling resin to my cracked and damaged silicate skin. My central nervous system still rattled with the memory of that burning red plume. The real correction did not arrive until midnight, deep within the High Proctor's secure briefing chamber. I watched the review board open the automated deep space archives on our terminal, loading the primary files for the human homeworld that had been locked away under an administrative filing error for the last 8 cycles. The old core ledger had not listed Earth as a standard garden world. The documentation had been grouped with the low-risk sectors by a clerical oversight, but the actual physical data painted a far darker picture. The human system was an active, high-gravity Class 12 death world, a volatile ball of competitive biology where the native plants had spent millions of years developing advanced neurological poisons, specifically designed to cause intense pain and tissue inflammation in mammalian consumers. The plants had grown those toxins so they would not be eaten. The humans had simply harvested those identical toxins, dried them out in the sun, and turned them into a family seasoning for their afternoon recreation. The High Proctor closed the thick file without issuing a single word of discipline against Cadet Chloe. She had violated no military charter. She had merely unpacked her standard regional provisions for lunch. Instead, a new, mandatory logistical protocol was pushed to every starship commander and base administrator in the active fleet before morning. The dented steel flask was returned to Chloe's quarters the next day, though it did not return to a standard shelf. It sat within a secure, custom-molded magnetic display box, its clear reinforced glass stamped with 3 bright orange tactical danger triangles to warn any passing lifeform away from the perimeter. I watched her through the monitoring feed as she approached the locker, her small, unarmored fingers lifting the hazard-marked cylinder with the exact same casual indifference she had shown during the containment strike. Strength that chooses to disguise its lethality behind a smiling rodent is not a biological category our strategy manuals prepared us for. We are going to have to rebuild the entire spire.